The IPP prison sentence scandal. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode. And our podcast guest today is Bernadette Mary, who we will introduce in a moment, or she can introduce herself rather in a moment. But we talk about the IPP prison sentence, and a lot of my viewers don't really know what the IPP prison sentence is, but it stands for Imprisonment for Public Protection. And it was reserved for the most severe of crimes, the most dangerous of criminals. But it wasn't used in that sense, and it was dished out to too many people. And there's still lads and lasses sitting inside now. Some have been in nearly as long as 20 years on as little as a 6-month tariff. And this is a massive scandal, like it says on the screen, the IPP prison sentence scandal. And I am highlighting this, and I'm also highlighting it because I was actually one of these statistics. I just had my IPP terminated in September of last year, and I am still bringing this to the attention of people to try and do my part. But there is a lot of advocates and a lot of women who have been helping the IPPs, the likes of Bernadette, and there's another group. The majority of them are all women who have been helping us IPPs. I still say us because I still class myself as IPP because I had it for nearly 20 years myself. And obviously I'm not forgetting the ones that are left behind. But Bernadette, if you would just like to introduce yourself and obviously why IPP is like a bit of a concern for you.
Yes, my name is Bernadette Emerson. I'm co-founder of IPP Committee and Action Campaign, and my partner was given an IPP prison sentence in 2005. And that's what's obviously started me. That's why I started campaigning, because this has a massive impact on us. He was given a 2-year tariff for street robbery of a laptop. He served his time. He's been released and recalled since. His last recall was 8 years ago for missing an appointment. And you know, it's a scandal. And he does suffer with mental health. And I've also come across the IPP action plan, which I find is now the new IPP sentence since the abolishment.
So has your partner been back in for another 8 years without being released now?
Yes.
And how many times has he been recalled?
About 4 times he's been recalled.
Right. And he's now obviously been back in on 8 years on a recall, and he is now suffering badly with his mental health, isn't he?
Yes, 100%. He was given the diagnosis of bipolar disorder before he ever had the IPP. And since he was given the IPP, after his first release in 2011, he'd had a mental health breakdown 6 months later. So he was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. After completing treatment and recovering, he was given a community treatment order, which meant that if he missed medication, appointments, or so on, it was a recall to hospital to complete treatment. But probation went into the courts, got an emergency court order, and transferred all his conditions of his community treatment order over to his licensed conditions. So he becomes subject to his own mental health treatment and decline through his IPP license conditions. And roughly about 2 years after he completed treatment, he's asked for a medication review to come off the depot injection of his high dose of risperidone, and he went to oral medication and the low dose of risperidone, and a psychiatrist agreed on the basis that he goes back for a review to see if he's managing. He missed an appointment, and from there on, it's been recall after recall. Probation have refused to release the CTO back into the community and mental health services, and it's just caused massive decline with him.
So when he's been recalled, it's been for no further offences, hasn't it? It's just been for, like you've just mentioned, for missing appointments. There's been no crimes committed.
No,
it's
missing
just
appointments.
Missing appointments and things like this. And this is an ongoing occurrence with the IPPs. The majority of them that are inside now on recalls, none of them have committed further offences. They've been recalled because of probation, sometimes, like we say, for missing an appointment, for not complying with probation, as in having a disagreement with them, and the probation take a dislike with them, recall them back to prison. and they could be in for, like your partner, 8 years without even being released.
Yeah, exactly. And what's happened with him on this recall is that his bipolar disorder has been removed and replaced with personality disorder. So they stopped his medication altogether because personality disorder doesn't require medication to treat it, because it's a contested mental illness or diagnosis. There's no scientific input into personality disorder, so you don't require medication. That's made my partner worser. It's caused parole deferrals. He's had 2 mental health hospital sections on this recall. He's gone into hospital, he's had treatment, completed it, returned to prison, and then we just end up going back to square one. He gets the personality diagnosis put back in place and bipolar removed, and he's just required to do psychology sessions then without treatment for the symptoms.
And has his mental health obviously getting worse since the IPP? Did you
Yeah.
say that he had mental health before he went into prison?
Yeah, he had bipolar disorder before he had his IPP, but what he has been diagnosed with because of the IPP is post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, I can quite imagine that.
Yeah.
A lot of IPPs, especially when you go on license, when you're suffering in fear of recall. And that fear of recall actually sometimes leads to your recall because you're that afraid of it. Like you say, you're suffering with your mental health, and mental health can be a reason for probation to recall you.
Yeah, because
I know firsthand myself. I've been out here on an IPP on that license, and you're suffering with anxiety and sometimes depression because you're in fear of going back to prison, even though you might not be committing crimes or doing anything wrong. It's the fear of it that sets your mental health off, and people are scared to ask for help because probation recall you back to prison.
Yeah, because asking for help is seen as a risk as well, and you're not going to get the help because of the structure of the IPP and the license conditions. And it's shocking that people are still subject to the sentence considering it was abolished, and it was actually abolished on the basis of being inhumane and psychologically torturous, and the courses were prolonging people's incarceration. Yet now we have the IPP action plan doing exactly the same, which I consider to be rebranding of what the IPP was when the IPP sentence was in effect.
So what is the IPP action plan then, Bernadette? So obviously is that, I'll let you explain it. You know obviously better than me.
Yeah, the IPP action plan was actually created between the years of 2015 and 2016 after the IPP sentence was abolished. It was actually created on the basis of families crying out for the neglect of their loved ones who were committing suicide through neglect of their mental health. But the IPP action plan is structured as a defence for the Ministry of Justice, realistically. So it's a business model strategy that is centred around the mental health of IPPs, rehabilitation, and their idea of treatment, which is psychology with no medication put into it. So if someone has, and I'm sure you're familiar with the PIPE courses too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
that comes into the IPP action plan. So in 2007, an amendment was made to the Mental Health Act to do with the mental illness of psychopathy or psychopath. And that amendment was to rebrand it to personality disorder and take away the treatability clause. So if someone had what now they call personality disorder, which was once psychopath or psychopathy, they no longer require treatment for it, but just psychology. Then in 2011, a further amendment was made to the Mental Health Act by the Ministry of Justice. Again, there was no scientific input from that amendment along with the 2007 amendment, but they then created something called the Offender Personality Disorder Pathway Programme. So it was already being put together, and now they've implemented this into the IPP action plan. So with the IPP action plan, It actually creates more courses, which will prolong incarceration for IPPs. It takes away their right to scientifically proven and clinical treatment to treat their psychosis. And they are put under psychologists a lot who, and it's wrong, but they write up fictional psychology reports about IPPs, which heightens their risk and causes problems for release through parole. So, but it's quite bizarre what the IPP action plan stands for, but it's a protection barrier for the Ministry of Justice, not doing any good for IPPs.
So that's the thing, like you said, it's not for helping the IPPs, it's obviously for them.
Yeah.
I've met lads in prison, and I've interviewed people on here before who's got someone, Joseph Grundy, his brother's IPP. I think he's been around about 17 years, I can't remember exactly. But he's suffering really bad with his mental health. But the mental health is actually caused through the IPP.
The sentence causes it.
That's the reasons they're now using for not releasing them. It used to be they would release you if you were no longer deemed a risk to the public. They're now deemed not a risk to the public, but they're a risk to themselves because of their own mental health. But the mental health is caused because of the IPP. So how can you keep somebody in prison who's suffering with mental health because of the IPP? It just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't. It's actually destructive what they're doing. It's that, like you said, they're using it as a risk, but there's already a solution to treatment of mental health anyway, that's always existed in the Mental Health Act. But IPPs are denied this because they got to prove themselves to be low risk for parole. How can they do that when they've now mental illnesses are now being triggered, psychosis is being triggered through the damage and the trauma of the IPP sentence? It's repetitive trauma, it's the knockbacks, it's never knowing your release date, it's watching people commit worse crimes than you get released, and they feel alone and isolated, and it's torturous. And imagine being in psychosis, mental health decline and distress, while being told by a prison system you need to behave yourself, or you need to focus on getting onto these courses and completing them, otherwise you will never get release. It just is barbaric.
I've been in that position myself when I've been in prison, especially on a recall, and not knowing when you're ever to be released. Sometimes you get recalled and you're waiting for parole hearings. Parole hearings keep getting deferred. You've got kids on the outside and they keep saying, Dad, when you're coming home, you can't get that is enough to break a man, because you can't tell your kids when you're coming home. At least if you had a release date, you say, right, I'm coming back in a year, 2 years, whatever, then they know and you know. So it's not just the torture on the IPPs in prison, it's people like yourself who's waiting for the loved ones and the kids that are suffering as well, waiting for them to come home when there is no release date. And if you're not strong-minded, I'll give some more examples of the lads that I met inside. One of my good friends, Siggy, who's an Indian lad from Bradford. I was in home with him. He was into his 9th year, I believe it was, when I was in there with him. His 4-year tariff. He had no trouble, no nickings or anything in the full 4 year. His paroles kept getting deferred. After 6 years, he came up for a hearing, and they said, right, we need you to do this course, but you've got to go over another prison. So they give him a 12-month knockback. Then they give him another knockback because he didn't have time to get to the prison again. So after 8 years, Spice came on the scene in the prisons. He tried it, and it took him out of the prison. So he then became a Spice head. And every time he was coming up for paroles then, he was getting knocked back because he was given positive drug tests. But he was taking the drugs to cope with the IPP. They weren't letting him out. But now that he's using, then that's the excuse to keep him in prison. I said 8 or 9 years. I think he was in about 11 or 12. But it was up to the 8 years when he started using. But he's been using for years now. And he's just stuck in that cycle. But I said to him, why are you using that stuff? And he said, well, when I take it, it takes us out of the prison. I can't get out. And like we both just mentioned earlier on, people are coming in for horrific murders, getting a 15-year tariff and getting out before the IPPs.
I know, it's scandalous. That's actually quite heartbreaking. So
It is.
he developed a substance addiction because of the IPP sentence to help him, you know, it's a block. He's trying to mentally block it out, what he's going through, rather than the prison finds a solution to his addiction or, you know, support him. That's being held against him and he's being denied parole. And this is a massive problem with IPPs. They're being denied parole by what the sentence is actually doing to them. You know, like you said, he went in, he wasn't a substance misuser anyway, but he developed that because of the prison, and it should not have been available to him in the prison. You know, we got a prison system in crisis, massive crisis. IPPs are still subject to the sentence. How are they ever going to get these IPPs out of the prison system? And it looks like to me they have no intention of doing that, because their revised IPP action plan is going to uphold them for another 11 years. It would take 11 years before every IPP is released, which is ridiculous.
It is. It's absolutely ridiculous. And when we're just on the matter there, like drugs in prison, drugs are readily available in every prison, every wing, up and down the country. And how can you tell somebody who's not getting released to keep getting knockbacks? Everybody on the wing, just that 90% of people on the wings are off their heads all the time. But the IPP was to keep off it. But they haven't got wings for IPPs, so they keep them all together. So they keep them on a drug-free wing.
That's bad.
But like it's the prison's responsibility that there's actually drugs in the prison. If there wasn't any there, they wouldn't be taking them. So how can you penalise somebody for taking something in prison to try and escape from that reality that they're stuck in?
Exactly. You can't penalise them. The prison should be held responsible too, and accountability should be on them. But this is the problem. The IPP is just every aspect of their life, in whether they're in prison or outside prison, is just monitored and judged. And it's all about judgment. It's not about support. It's not about progressing them off the sentence. There is no more time left for IPPs. They don't need progressing off the sentence. We need a re-sentencing exercise with aftercare in place, catered to the individual needs of each IPP, whether that's putting them into putting them under their local mental health teams, or putting them into rehabilitation in the community-based trauma informed support. No more punishment in prison. Their sentence ended long ago, and it's ridiculous. And like you said, where your children always wanted that answer for when you were coming home, that's exactly what I go through with my children. I have no answer to their questions, and it's traumatic for them, because the uncertainty that their parent is going through, not knowing the answer, and as an adult we understand what's going on, that's actually a lot harder for a child to process and comprehend. It's wrong. Everyone has to suffer, because the Ministry of Justice cannot hold their hands up and admit their wrongdoing.
So again, back to your partner there, when you're on about, obviously you have got children together, so you have experienced exactly what you are experiencing it now. So, and I know how hard it is. Me and my wife, obviously we went through it, and it's the most heartbreaking and hard thing ever. Your partner, did you have the kids before he went in on his IPP?
My oldest we had before he went in on his IPP, because she's actually 20 now, my oldest child, and then we got our youngest child. And it's quite bizarre, because my oldest daughter was a baby when he had his IPP. She was 7 years old when it was abolished, and she's 20 now, yet my youngest child was born after the abolishment of the IPP. And it's bizarre. How can I be expected to sit down and explain to my daughter, your dad is serving a prison sentence that was abolished and doesn't exist in law, and that's why you haven't got him in your life? You know, we're expected to raise our children as law-abiding citizens, but then you've got to also be expected to teach your children the corruption of the law too. It's wrong.
and for anybody, because you do get people on the same way, he shouldn't have broke the law, but going
Yeah.
back, he pinched a laptop. A laptop doesn't deserve all those years in prison. Pinching doesn't deserve that amount of time in prison. So how many years has he actually spent in now?
Altogether, he spent about 15 years in prison, 5 in the community. And you're right, I don't condone what he did. He was wrong and he deserved to be given a sentence for it, but not a life sentence, not indefinite. You know, there was a reason he was given a 2-year tariff, because that's all the judge could have handed down if it was determinate. And, you know, when people are young, and like, you know, yourself, people do things that they, you know, they later on regret. And it's also been scientifically proven that the frontal lobe doesn't complete until we're 25 years old. So choices we make before that age, we would regret after we turn 25. You know, we mature by that point.
And that's why as well, like a lot of the lads that are stuck in now, coming up like 15, 16, all the way up to 20 years in prison, got the IP when they were teenagers, 17, 18-year-old, pinching bikes, pinching phones. Like, these are things that kids do on rough estates. This is the norm. Like, but unfortunately, the IPP was getting dished out at that time. Like, even myself, it was my first prison sentence, straight IPP. That IPP wasn't really designed for that. It was designed for prolific, serious offenders. And a lot of these teenagers that were given IPP, they haven't even had a chance to mature into adults, because when you're in prison, the age that you go into prison, you stay at that age. You don't mature and properly mature whilst you're in prison, because you're not having them life experiences. You're around like-minded people. You went into prison, say 18, 19-year-old, full of daft young lads, all still having a laugh in prison, but your mind doesn't develop once you're in there. And sometimes they get out, if they do get out, in that same mentality and same age mindset. And that's why a lot of them end up getting recalled straight back to prison, because they haven't had that chance to develop properly into adults. They haven't had the life experiences.
Exactly, that's point on. It's true. They're not getting that chance to mature, have growth and learn, because, like you said, the mentality they went in with, you know, that it's not immature. I wouldn't use the words immature, but where they were that age, they've gone in, and there's no development for them in prison. It doesn't help them. And it's quite sad then, because they come out, they're not being given a chance. And the IPP was wrongly implemented and legislated in 2005, and it was actually rushed through Parliament in time for political votes. It was meant for the most serious in society, but it was the desperation for the then Labour government to look toughest on crime. And this is why IPP has been handed out disproportionately to so many people. I think it was 156 crimes you could get an IPP for, whereas when it's a life sentence, you can only get a life sentence for 11 specific crimes. And sorry, were you going to talk?
No, I was just listening. I was going to say something.
I know what the IPP sentence actually comes from, the Criminal Justice Act 2003, which was a draft paper at that time of what they wanted to put in place, and it had not been completed. And it was that draft that they used to legislate the IPP, which then I believe that's the link between it being wrongly implemented and legislated, because they were just desperate for those political votes, and IPPs are political prisoners.
Yeah. So what I was going to say, because I thought you were finished there, Bernard, sorry, but I think the shortest IPP was at something like 28 days.
Yes, 28 days.
Was that shorter than I'm sure? 28 days IPP, and I think that person, whoever it is, I'm not sure who it was, has been in. I think he might be one of the longest in as well.
Yeah.
28 days. So a 2-month sentence. So you could have been home within 4 weeks, but the judges went and give you an IPP, which takes 6 months for your reports to get done for the parole board. So how that was just.
Where's the logic? Yeah, where was it?
Yeah, judge must have really hated that person to give him a 28-day
Yes,
IPP. And
yes,
again,
definitely.
because of the short tariff, the people that are getting these rebel against it because they're thinking they didn't deserve this, and these are the
Yeah,
ones that keep getting knocked back. But then they just think, right, they hit their fucking button and they don't comply with the system. But again, it's the thinking that they're just going to rebel against the system and one day they'll get out. But look at them, some of them 20 years inside the prison, which is an absolute waste of life. Life is so,
precious.
what's the word? Precious. Life is so precious, and then it's just wasted like that because of a sentence that was even abolished because it was deemed inhumane.
Yes, exactly. How can they justify it? How it doesn't make sense. Yet the Ministry of Justice and the government are still getting away with this, and it's the impact on that man's life. 28 days. And then they serve an indefinite sentence. And the IPP has reached the levels of arbitrary continued detention now. You know, you've got so many that have committed suicide on this sentence in prison and outside prison. And the Ministry of Justice know this. But what are they doing to help them? They're doing nothing. They're helping themselves. And that's about it. They keep using the term public protection with no context. They write up these speculative risk reports that have no evidence of actual danger. I mean, it's an entire mess. It's a complete mess. But human beings pay the price for it, and it's wrong.
And even when they're released on the IPP, when you get your parole, people think, right, that's it, you're out, your
Yeah,
sentence is done, but it's not.
it's
You're
not.
out here in the community. And before I had my IPP terminated, I was tortured off probation. The way they used to go on, and like, I've never done so well in my life, like helping so many people in the community,
Yeah,
setting up my own health group in my gym. I was even going into schools, talking with kids
yeah,
on probation, all nice to me face, saying, oh, the recommenders in another year's time, I keep doing what I'm doing. Another year came round and I said, what are you recommending? And she turned around and said, I'm not recommending you for release. And I said, why not? Says, you said to me 12 months ago, if you keep doing what you're doing, I'll recommend you release. I said, I'm doing even better. She
yeah,
says, yes. She says, yes, but you're working with vulnerable people. I says, what? Well, because I've set a mental health group up and I'm going into a school talking to kids who are at risk of going to prison, you're
yeah.
keeping me on my lines. And she turned on, she said, yes. I
Wow,
says,
that's
is right. So
shocking.
if I didn't run my own business, I was on job seekers loans, I wasn't doing the mental health group, and I wasn't going into the schools, you would recommend me to come off it. She said, yes. Couldn't believe it.
That's shocking.
So
This is it. It's barbaric, isn't it, with probation?
you can
They're
imagine the
not
effect
supportive.
on me.
I can
Yeah.
imagine.
Afterwards, I was thinking, they were just trying to dampen you. They wanted to see your reaction because you're doing so well and you don't need their help. They don't like it.
No,
Because
they
I've
don't.
seen what probation officers, the ones that are prolific drug users, alcoholics that need their help. They love them type of prisoners, ex-prisoners, the ones that are on license because they love giving them help and they love not mothering them, but if you know what I mean, they love trying to pretend that they're looking after them because they need help. But then when they come across people that don't need them, don't need the help, they don't like it. They go
Yeah, they
against
do.
you.
They get very judgmental. But that makes things worse for them. Like for you, I mean, and I think the role of probation officers is quite outdated and needs changing because an approach like that is disgusting.
But
To
they
treat you
shouldn't
that
have
way
the
because
power.
you were doing well.
Probation shouldn't have the power single-handedly to say, right, recall. It's up to
Yes.
the parole board, a group of members, to release you. So it should be up to them whether yes they think that you pose a danger and you need to be sent back to prison.
Exactly. That I actually agree with that because, you know, when it's just out, because like you said as well, and also I know probation officers sometimes can actually have it in for the people they work with. And, you know, they just look for one thing and they just do their best to get you recalled. They're not helpful. Then I actually remember at one point my partner asked the probation officer, could he go back into work? And she said no. I don't think you're ready for that. But he was ready for it. He was ready for that progression. He was ready to try and live some sort of normality in the community. But they don't care, and they don't like that progress, and it's not good then.
And like you've just said there, that answer, when they have turned around and said no, can set a person right back. It could have probably set your partner back, probably went in on himself and thinking all sorts, because that's what it does. It sends your mental health wild and makes you think all sorts, and you can't sleep, you're feeling depressed and anxious, and you shouldn't be feeling like that. You're better in your life, but then the only thing that's hindering and pulling you back are the ones that's supposed to be supporting you.
Yeah, managing and supporting you, and they're not. They actually become, they can become problematic, and the anxiety they cause is unbelievable. There's just no need for it, but they're sort of power mad. That's the impression I get off probation officers. Some of them are just their role doesn't serve that support that an IPP needs in the community. I mean, a probation officer has actually used their powerful approach to drive an IPP to commit suicide because they were scared of going back to prison indefinitely, but they could have helped that IPP, but they didn't. And it's just wrong.
The story, the video on here about that person I think you might be on about, he was doing well. He'd been out of prison. He was a personal trainer and everything, doing really well for himself. And I think he was in a hospital, wasn't he? And he had a little bit of a setback. And he went by, he had a drink to try and cope. Probation found out he'd had a drink, and they said, right, we're issuing a recall. He'd even rang them up and said, what are you doing? Are you going to recall? And she said, yes. She says, well, he said, if you recall me, you'll be looking for a dead body. And she still went against him. And she actually rang the police to go and recall him instead of saying, like, you need to look for a vulnerable person. And I think it was either days or a week went by, and she turned around and said, right, I think you now need to be looking for him because he might have done something to yourself. And then obviously they did find him, unfortunately, and he actually took his own life because he was that scared of going back to prison. But that was quite hard for me when I read that as well. And I was looking into it because I thought, I was thinking about myself. I thought he's been out. I'm sure he was out about 12 years.
Yeah, he was.
A personal trainer. His license should have been gone. It shouldn't have even been on license.
Shouldn't have existed.
Being told you're getting recalled after 12 years just because you'd had a drink and you were suffering a little bit instead of getting help.
I know. It's barbaric. Yeah. Well, it was the COVID conditions at the time as well that weren't helpful for him either.
I know, but that's when I got recalled. But COVID just came in just after I was recalled as well.
Really? So you were in prison with the COVID conditions?
I went in the December 2019, and then it was March, I think, 21 when COVID struck. But that actually is when I turned my life around. I come to terms with everything. And because I was battling a lot with my mental health because my best friend had actually killed himself and I found him. And
sorry to hear that.
That sent my mental health wild. Obviously, I was drinking that again. Obviously, I ended up getting recalled back to prison. But whilst I was in there, and actually during COVID, I came to terms with my friend's suicide. And I started training, got myself in the fittest shape possible, both physically and mentally. I was actually helping all the other IPP lads. I was getting them out on the yard, getting them trained up, because when COVID struck, it was bad enough anyways in prison, but COVID, sometimes you were banged up for 36 hours before getting out for half an hour exercise. Because if you got because they had to split it up through the day.
Yeah.
Because of the landing individually. Sometimes you would have association at 8 o'clock. Wait, not association, because you didn't get that. You would get exercise at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And then you'd have half an hour exercise. And then because they rotated the landings, some days it would fall on where your exercise wasn't then until 3:30 the next day. So from 8:30 in the morning till 3:30 the next afternoon, you were just left banged up all day long, getting fed behind the door. Absolutely.
That's bad.
But some of the lads that was suffering really bad with the mental health couldn't
Yeah.
sleep, so they sometimes missed their early morning exercise
Exercise.
because they couldn't physically get out of bed, especially the ones on medication. So if they
Yeah.
missed that exercise in the morning, they were going days without even coming out for a shower or anything.
That's
But I used to
bad.
go to the doors open the flat and you couldn't even see them in the pod because they had the windows all barricaded up and it was just pitch black and you could
Wow.
smell it through the door. But I used to bang them up and shout them and say, "Get yourself out here, we're going on the order exercise."
Yeah.
I'd tell the screws, I'd say, "Come and open his door." And I'd get them out and I'd get them all trained and get them all fitting. I suppose that
That's
was
good.
my way of dealing with it as well by helping other
Yeah.
people.
Well, you're motivating them, and it's helping you then with the grief that you were going through, and you look at it like if you look at it like this, you're actually helping these people to bring their mental health up and
Yeah,
to do better in themselves, because that's what sometimes we need as human beings. We need that support. We need
yeah.
that motivation.
But
It's
even now,
quite
like in prison, we're about like there's no proper support for the lads on IPP. I
no,
think some prisons they are trying to do like IPP lands or IPP wings where you can
yeah,
put them all together. Because if you've got 2 or 3 lads on a wing with another 100 lads, everyone's doing fixed terms. They're all doing a few months at a time, getting released, and then you've got 1 or 2 IPPs having to watch this on a daily basis. If you had them all together on the same wing, then they would be able to get more help. They'd be able to help each other. But
yeah.
again, for some reason, the prison system just doesn't seem to care. They don't do that.
No, they don't. They seem to split IPPs up a lot from each other now. Because I remember when my partner first started serving his IPP, he was on wings with a lot of IPPs, and they did support each other. But like you said, this prison systems don't care anymore. But they must have seen how well IPPs were doing when they were with each other. So why are they splitting them up now? It's like a setup to make them fail deliberately. It doesn't work for them.
So
Should
what's happening with the partner now then? Has he got a hearing coming up or is he?
His parole's been deferred because of a psychiatric assessment that needs to take place. He's quite very mentally ill in prison at the moment, and his psychosis is quite present, and he's refused to take his medication. He's lost a lot of trust in all the prison staff too. So the the process we're taking now is to get him into a mental health hospital to get him back under treatment, stabilize him, and from there he can have his parole hearing put together. But there's been so many deferrals now with his parole hearing because of psychiatric assessments or not being on the right medication, or probation wasn't available for one of the parole hearings and his sentence plan wasn't produced. It's a complete mess.
It's barbaric, like it's been described as barbaric.
Yeah.
What was the fellow called? David Blunkett, who even brought the
Oh, shit.
IPPs out. Says it's the one biggest regret of his life. He has sleepless nights.
Over
So
it.
that statement there, you would think would be enough
For them
to
to end
try
it. Yeah.
to end it completely. But
But they don't. And it took a lot of courage for Lord Blunkett to do that, because we're in touch with him. And, I think for a politician to come out and hold their hands up and say, look, I got this wrong and it needs to be put right, and Parliament's not listening. The ministry, the government, they're still ignoring it. And they've come up with their ridiculous IPP action plan, which, like I've said, it's just like the IPP sentence that used to exist, just rebranding of the name. And it's the same sort of layout as the IPP, doing courses, progressive courses. These courses are now traumatic for IPPs because there's no guarantee of release. There's no guarantee they'll pass parole. Their mental health is just deteriorated. And what they actually need to do is stop preventing that barrier to mental health treatment in an environment that will treat it like a hospital, because the IPP action plan works as a preventative measure, stopping them from accessing medical and clinical treatments in a hospital.
yeah, but some of the IPPs as well, they're actually beyond repair now, as in the
Yeah,
mental state and everything. Like the damage is done, and they're beyond repair, like the mental health has deteriorated so bad, but they need to be put in a hospital and getting help and be treated as a
Yeah.
patient rather than a prisoner.
Yeah, well, that's what they've become. The weird IPPs are patients now, and most of them are, but they're still being treated like a prisoner, and they still got expectations on them like a prisoner, and that's exploitation of their mental health anyway. They need that treatment in hospital, and we need the IPP action plan to stop acting as a barrier and preventative measure to treatment for mentally ill IPPs and give them a chance to be diagnosed with clinical, scientifically proven diagnoses.
Yeah. So what's coming up now then, Bernadette? Is there anything coming up as in more campaigns? Is there anything coming up in Parliament? Is there what's happening now behind the scenes?
Behind the scenes, well, at the moment, me and Shirley are trying to put together a judicial review because that's quite urgent now. We also in the process of working with a UN body to help us put an end to the IPP sentence, and we recently submitted to the Ministry of Justice our reasons why the IPP action plan needs to come to an end and what needs to be done for IPPs and the aftercare services that we've listed in there. So that's happening with us, and I know other campaigners are doing things too behind the scenes, trying to work on trying to fight for an end to this too.
So have you done any work with Ungrip, or is that separate to what you're doing?
Well, it's separate, but there have been times when we have worked with Ungrip. So,
Yeah.
like, we're more of a campaign group that's a bit more, we're more, I suppose, vocal in public. You know, we have
Right.
arranged protests. We do petition the government too. We're also in the process of trying to get, because what we've done before, we petitioned the government with 100 civic society signatory letter for a resentencing exercise for IPPs, and we're in the process of putting another one of those together for different reasons too, as to why we need an urgent judicial. I'm so sorry, Ricky, I'm not pronouncing it right. Judicial review and a full end to the IPP action plan, because with IPPs they need resentencing, release, and aftercare urgently.
Yeah. Well, hopefully something will come about and something will happen and get this barbaric sentence done and dusted for good.
For good.
And hopefully your partner gets out, and I hope your children are all right. Well, I hope they're coping
Yeah.
as well as can be. And I hope one
Yeah.
day your partner gets out and you just live as a happy family and you can get on with your life like me and my wife and my kids are now, because
Yeah.
obviously you must be looking at the likes of myself and my wife and thinking, you just want this now, you know what I mean? You just want that
Yeah.
opportunity.
That's all we deserve, just that normal family life. But even with you, you've said you still feel like you're an IPP, even though you've had it taken off you. And I think we're always going to be left with that permanent effect of IPP. But yeah, we just want our quality of life back, just to get on with it.
But it is, like you say, like when I've done a podcast with Cherie Nicol the other day as well, like when I speak about it, I still say, like us IPPs, because I also, like, I know there's a lot of decent lads in there stuck on it. So it's sort of like solidarity. I've got a platform here, I can help try and
Yeah.
promote the message and get it out, because I know there's a lot of people in the prison service, in the probation service, watch this and they might hopefully get a little bit educated off it and think, wow, like, see things from a different light and different side.
Yes, definitely. That's true, because your podcast can encourage legislative changes and improvements for IPP, and it's getting it out there. We need the public to become aware of this, because the ministry want this sort of hidden as some dirty little secret. They don't want the public to know. They want it swept under the rug. But we can't do that because lives are at stake. And it's the abuses they're committing against us and the suffering that we're going through. There's no justifying it.
I'm living proof as well that obviously when you're off IP, people
You
can
are.
be given a chance. Like, I got out in 2021. It's now coming into my 5th year and still doing better than ever. I've actually
Yeah.
propelled since the IPP was lifted off us. That was just a big weight on me back, dragging us back constantly. And I knew once it was terminated, I would just carry on in that different direction, or the right direction rather, and just being that better person
Yeah.
and proving them all wrong.
Exactly. You actually are one of the best examples to prove to them that this is
Yeah.
what happens when you give them an IPP a chance, their family
Give
a
them a
chance. And that's all they're asking for, and have been for years, is just that chance.
But
And we've
Bernadette,
got
I
to
think
keep
we've had a very,
fighting and to give them that chance.
I think we've had a very
Yeah.
good discussion. We've had a good chat. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Is there anything like you would
Same.
like to add?
Nothing I can think of right now, but
Yeah.
I'm grateful for doing this podcast with you today
Oh,
and
no worries.
just trying to promote what the IPP is and the impacts of it.
Well,
We
the
need
more
a
we
full
get the
end.
message out, people see it, the more people will realise and the more people will get behind it. Because
Yes.
people don't realise, like the majority of people on my channel now who I've educated about the prison and about the IPP sentence, and I've actually had people on who've said, you've actually changed my mind about prisoners, because some people just look at all prisoners as scum, don't give them the time of day.
Yes.
But then when they watch my channel and they realise that I actually was one of them, a prisoner and an IPP, it changes the mindset and the thing, right? They're not all the same. Some of them do deserve a chance.
Exactly. And that's just a perception that people have, isn't it? That they look at prisoners as scum, but they're not. These are human beings, and it's changing their views and showing them that, look, they are human beings and they can live just like anybody else.
Yeah.
And you are, and
But
do you know what? I'm really grateful for coming on today.
oh, no worries. It's been a pleasure, like I say. But I have got more podcasts coming up. I'm doing a one next week with another lad who has had his IPP terminated. He
Yeah.
actually didn't believe he was getting off, and he was suffering out here. I could tell because he used to be in contact with me a lot, messaging back with and forth. And he
Yeah.
didn't believe that all these new legislations that were coming in were actually real, because he'd been on the IPP license for that long. He thought it was a bit of a setup. He didn't actually believe it. And that's how bad it is out here still for the IPPs. When they get something in their head, they start feeling paranoid and anxiety and different things, and has a massive effect still out here.
Does 100%, because their trust has been broken. They've snatched so much hope off IPPs over the years. The biggest hope they snatched from IPPs was the abolishment of the sentence. Because it doesn't stand for IPP subject to the sentence, just the abolishment. And that must have been really hard for him, not being able to trust the new legislation coming in and having his license terminated. It's sad, isn't it?
He had a parole board that was due round about the same time it was due to be terminated. And when he looked into it, it said something about in the small print about if you have a parole hearing and you get knocked back, then you don't qualify for the termination. So he didn't want to go on his parole board. He was getting it deferred because he thought they were setting him up, they were going to give him a knockback, and then he wasn't getting terminated. But luckily he did. And a little bit of persuasion. He's coming on Monday, I think it is. We're going to do a little bit of a talk, so that'll be interesting.
Well, that'll be good. Yeah, 100%.
But if there's any IPPs that you know of, or IPP families, let them know if they want to come on. They're free to come on my platform if they want to share the story. And even if there's anyone on the other side of it, MPs, even David Blunkett, imagine getting him on for an interview. That would be interesting.
Okay. Yes, I can ask for you, and then I'll put them in touch. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, Bernadette, I'm going to leave that there for now. Maybe we could do a part later on, see how things progress. But best of luck to you and your family, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Ricky. And you too. Thank you. Bye.
No worries. Thank you very much. Take care.
You too. Take care.